Hello and welcome to Conversations. I'm Jim Blow, your host. Very pleased to have joining me today Yousef Rabhi, the 53rd State Representative, representing most of Ann Arbor.
That's right.
Welcome back to Conversations.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And you're finishing up, your third year as a state rep.
That's right. Yep.
And one of the differences this past year is it's the first year that you have been within the legislature, part of the minority, but a member of the majority on the executive branch, so to speak. How is that different?
Right. So it's been a very interesting year already, and we've actually seen a lot of progress in a variety of different areas. Some areas in particular that we're seeing a lot of great movement on are the issues of criminal justice reform and also around some environmental issues that we've been able to move the needle on. So,
and why that progress?
Yeah.
In other words, how is it different having a Democratic governor while you're still the minority party in both the House and the state Senate?
Yeah, so a few things happened in the last election. One, of course, the Democrats were able to regain the governor's office, as well as the Attorney General and the Secretary of State, among other statewide offices. But we were also able to flip 5 seats in the state House and 5 seats in the state Senate. So we actually narrowed the vote gap between the Republican and Democratic caucuses substantially. And that, paired with the fact that we have a Democratic governor, has led to a situation where we can actually, have more of a role at the negotiating table in terms of pushing legislation forward. And when it comes to the criminal justice reform issues in particular, I think the fact that we have Attorney General Nessel at the helm as Attorney General is really helping to drive some of that conversation. And we're really seeing, Republicans, Democrats, come to the table from the House, from the Senate, from the executive, and really try to push forward some of these great initiatives.
It would seem that with the narrowing of the gap within the House and the Senate, that both the Democrats and the Republicans have to understand that they have to work together to get anything, you could say, accomplished. The Republicans, when they had the majority in both the House, the Senate, and the executive branch, negotiated within themselves, let's say.
Right.
But now, and to a certain extent, the Democrats could propose whatever they wanted,
Right,
because they knew it wasn't going to get approved.
Right. Yeah.
And now both sides, in the case of the criminal justice issues,
Yeah.
what has happened or what is being discussed now that shows that willingness to get together?
So a few issues. One of the first bills that we were actually asked to vote on, which I supported, was a reform of our civil asset forfeiture laws. For many years in the state of Michigan, if you were suspected of a crime, so you're not proven guilty, you're not even taken to court, you're just suspected of a crime, the police can actually come and seize your assets, and then they can sell them off at public auction. And so what our law basically says is, in the case of drug cases, if your assets are seized, they can't just be sold off unless you're actually convicted of a crime.
Okay.
So it's actually creating some civil liberty protections for folks within that criminal justice system. Another great example is we recently voted on a bill to raise the age from 17 to 18 for convicting somebody as an adult. And Michigan was one of very few states that still had 17-year-olds going to jails as adults instead of that
Was
age
that,
being 18.
in a sense, the difference being automatic?
Yeah.
That a 17-year-old automatically was being tried as an adult?
In many cases, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
that's
now,
right.
can those under the age of 18, can they still potentially, in some cases, be tried as an adult?
In the cases are very rare, but
Okay.
yes. And so that issue was resolved. That's a huge issue that's been out there for a long time. So we raised the age. But another bill package that I'm actually part of, that I have a bill in that recently passed the House, is a bill around expungement. So this focuses on folks and their criminal records, right? And so we have folks that have served their time in jail, that have exited the prison system, that are trying to reenter into society, and they can't get a job, they can't get housing because they have these criminal records. And what that ends up doing is causing this the cycle of recidivism to be perpetuated, and folks can't get back on their feet. So what we're proposing with this expungement bill is to do a number of things, but in a sentence, it's basically expanding the ability of individuals to get their record expunged in a way that's actually going to make Michigan one of the most forward-thinking states in the country around expungement issues.
Would that still be, you could say, identified or limited to the type of crimes that they had been convicted of, or is it really for anyone who has served their time in prison or wherever?
Right, so there are some crimes that won't be included, particularly the more violent crimes will not be included, but there's a vast number of felonies and misdemeanors that are nonviolent crimes. And one of the things that we're doing, just to give you an idea of what some of the bills do, is the bill that I have in the package, right now there's, after you've served your time, you have to wait for 5 years before your record can be expunged, even for a misdemeanor, right? And so what my bill says is, instead of 5 years, you should only have to wait for 3 years to get that misdemeanor offense expunged. So it actually reduces the wait time for folks that have those misdemeanors on their record. There's a bill that
why even 3 years? I mean, misdemeanors are minor crimes.
Right.
Would this be for those who have served time in a jail or prison, or just any misdemeanor?
Any nonviolent misdemeanors.
Okay.
Any nonviolent
So
misdemeanors.
traffic issues potentially.
So yeah, one of the bills in the package, it adds traffic violations. So up until now, traffic violations were non-expungible, the vast majority of them. So this added a whole slew of those. There's another bill in the package that includes some marijuana offenses. So use and possession of marijuana, for example, will now be expungable. But one of the hallmark bills in the package is one that creates an automatic expungement process. One of the major barriers for folks to get their records expunged is the financial barrier of having to go hire a lawyer, go get your record expunged. So the vast majority of folks that actually are able to get their record expunged, that are eligible for expungement, don't, because they can't afford it, because they can't get a job, they can't get housing. So we're creating an auto expungement process where folks that are eligible, if they haven't breached a number, I think it's 4 misdemeanors or 2 felonies, if they're within that cap, then they can get their record expunged automatically after a wait period.
And presently, is it up to any judges that on whether to expunge, or is it automatic if you can afford it, as you say?
So yeah, there's certain criteria that you have to meet, and those criteria are determined through the legal process. So if you do meet those criteria and you're able to hire an attorney and you're able to go take that through the system, then yes, you can get your record expunged by petition, is what they call it. So you petition to get your record expunged.
You mentioned some of the other bills that that you and others have put forward. Are any of them, you could say, retroactive? And by that I mean, you mentioned the marijuana, where now the state of Michigan has, you could say, legalized personal use. Those who either are in prison now or have served their time and potentially would have their record expunged.
Right.
Those in prison now, could those be addressed? Would those people potentially be let out? Or is that still something that's being debated?
That's still something that's being debated. This is simply dealing with folks' criminal records. It's not dealing with folks that are in prison right now.
Likewise with juveniles?
What do you mean?
If there's someone who is in prison today whose sentence is based on them having been 17, where they've been sentenced as an adult.
Yeah, so I believe that for those, it's not retroactive. But for the expungement bills, in some ways it is retroactive, because if somebody has served their sentence for marijuana, if they're back out in the community and say they have a marijuana misdemeanor, for example, and they're 4 years in, right? They have 1 more year to go. Once my bill passes, it'll go to 3 years, which means they'll suddenly be eligible for expungement. So the expungement bill package will, in the immediate term, impact about 100,000 folks just in Wayne County alone. We're estimating 900,000 across the state that will be immediately impacted by this bill package. There's 7 bills in the package, and help them to get their record expunged.
You mentioned the marijuana and the fact that the state of Michigan voted last year to legalize personal use.
Right.
Where does that stand? It seems like many communities have done their own votes and said no. Ann Arbor has said yes, and other communities in Washtenaw County have said yes. Is it literally up to each different government to determine whether or not they will allow it to be sold and bought within their district or their county?
Right. So there's 2 systems. What we passed with Proposal 1 was the adult use system, but we've had the medical marijuana system also in existence. So you have to think about them as 2 separate systems, right? And so each community, the beauty of both laws, the medical marijuana and the adult use marijuana laws, are that each community gets to choose whether this is right for them. So each community across the state, every township, every city gets to vote and say, all right, we're going to allow this here. And they can set the parameters in which they want to allow it. So they can say, we only want a certain number of shops. We don't want the shops to be within a certain distance of certain types of establishments. They can set those parameters as each community sees fit.
And so you will have potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of different rules, regulations within the state on who, where, what can be purchased in that.
Yeah, it's mostly around where, like zoning, about where the
Okay.
shops can be located, how many can be located. There are certain things that are permitted, statewide. Once you opt into the law, then you're under the coverage of the law. So the state basically sets the parameters, the large-scale parameters, and then within that, the cities and townships can make their choices.
And just within the last week or so, it now is apparent that come December 1st of this year, communities that have opted in potentially can allow the legal selling of personal marijuana
Right.
in an establishment that already had what? The medical
license, right.
But they haven't, state's not issued any personal use licenses yet.
Right, so there's the first year of the Prop 1 going into effect is just the current licensees under the medical that can sell that. But once that year has expired, then new applicants can come into the system. One of the big issues, though, that we're seeing with both systems is a supply shortage, because when the medical marijuana system started, it actually restarted a few times.
Yeah.
And so the latest restart of the system was not too long ago. And so a lot of the growers haven't gotten their production up to full capacity yet. And there's a rigorous testing process that they have to go through, very stringent. And so getting that product not only grown, harvested, and then tested
Processed
has
and all
meant
that,
that there's a real shortage, both for the medical system and the new adult use system as well. So that's an issue to be monitoring and looking out for.
Well, we're going to take a short break, come back and talk about some of the environmental issues that you mentioned. Ask our viewers to stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
Ann Arbor Inclusive. We support the community of people with special needs.
Uh-oh, you've just discovered that you are a senior citizen. What do you do now? Well, one thing you can do is watch Senior Moments. You'll be encouraged as you learn about activities, meet interesting people, and discover that there really is a lot for you to do. The show also provides information about health, finances, and entertainment. So don't miss Senior Moments to make your senior life better than ever.
Hello and welcome back to Conversations. I'm speaking today with Yousef Rabhi, the 53rd State Representative from Ann Arbor area. You mentioned criminal justice, another area that you've seen some bipartisan effort deals with the environment and other energy issues. What has been accomplished this first year under a bipartisan legislature executive branch?
Well, so one of the big victories, I think, of this legislature actually happened last night. And that's when the governor actually signed a 3-bill package, which included one of my bills. Actually, this was my first ever. This is my first bill that I've ever had signed into law.
And that goes back to the fact you were a minority both
right.
in the House, the Senate, and the executive branch up
That's
until
right.
this year.
Yeah, I mean, the last term, the Republicans really didn't give us much of anything.
Yeah.
A vast majority of us didn't get any bills passed. Some did, but most of us didn't. And so now that we have this shared government, we're able to actually get some legislation forward. It's worthy to note that these same bills, similar bills to these, actually passed the legislature last term, but the governor at the time, Republican governor, vetoed them.
Okay.
So they did not become law, and so this was trying it again, basically. So we reintroduced the bills and pushed them through the process, and this time Governor Whitmer, she actually signed the bills on a solar panel, which was kind of cool. So she had a big solar panel up and she signed them.
You mentioned 3 bills. What do they do?
What do they do? So
let's start with the one you actually introduced.
Well, it's actually easier to talk about them as a package of 3. So essentially what they do is they clarify that solar panels and other alternative energy systems that folks install on their homes or businesses are not subject to property taxes. So when the city assessor comes around and looks at a house, they can't look at the solar panel and add the value of the solar panel to the home's value for the purposes of property taxation.
Because property taxes are limited to a certain % increase each year.
Well, really, I would use I think a better analogy is if you replace your furnace, the assessor's not going to come and say, okay, your house is worth more, you have to pay more taxes, right? And so we think that a solar panel should be a similar type of appliance, considered a similar type of appliance by the city assessor. So when they come by, they're not saying, okay, now your property taxes will go up because you've installed a solar panel on your house. Now, it is important to note too that the law that we have now passed is limited to to 150 kilowatt systems, which is pretty big, but it's not like the large scale industrial utility size. So the utilities will still have to pay for their assets. But for individual homeowners that are installing solar panels on their house, for businesses that want to try to go carbon free, this creates an opportunity. It breaks down a significant barrier that's in the way, because a lot of times folks can't afford the payback for installing solar panels. This takes back one of those significant barriers.
You mentioned the payback for a homeowner.
Yeah.
If you install solar panels or other forms of alternative energy, how does it work that saves you money? In other words, that energy that is created, do you use that within your home, or do you sell it to Edison, who then turns around and sells it back to you?
So I'm glad you asked that question, because that actually leads into another package of bills that I've introduced in a bipartisan way. So far, they haven't gotten a hearing yet, but we've introduced them with Republicans and Democrats. It was a similar package of bills that I introduced last year. And essentially what it does is it says that, so to your point, we used to have a system of net metering, where if you have a solar panel on your house and you generate 80 units of energy, but you use 100 units of energy, you only have to pay for that 20 units of energy that you have taken from the grid, basically. But DTE did not like that, and so they went to the state and they said, we want a new system. And they actually won their rate case under a Snyder-appointed board, which is now changing over under the new governor. But what they changed it to was what's called an inflow-outflow system. What that means is if you generate those same 80 units of energy, you have to sell that back to DTE at the wholesale rate, so the rate that they pay to their other power providers, wholesale energy, and then you have to buy all 100 units of energy back from them at the retail rate, which is a much marked up price. And so
wouldn't that cost the homeowner then more?
Yes. So it's a bad system for folks that are.
Oh, that's how we do it now, you're saying?
That's what they changed it to. It's beneficial for DTE. It's not good for homeowners. So the bill that I introduced would eliminate that system and make us go back to the net metering system that we have. And then I introduced another bill on top of that, which after we've sort of wiped the slate clean, we would actually re-look at the system and take into account the actual advantages that solar brings to the system. Things like when there's peak demand in the middle of the day when the sun is shining, the solar
Everyone's got
panels
their
are
air conditioning going.
and the solar panels are cranking, right? And so it's peak usage, but the solar panels are actually taking in the most energy, and that's a benefit to the system. And the fact that you're not literally sending electrons downtown Detroit and then sending them back to your neighbor's house. If you're not using all the power that your panels are creating, it's going to your neighbor's houses. And that's saving the grid infrastructure from use and so forth. And so that's another benefit for the system. So my bill would say you have to take into account the benefit that solar brings into the system and the con, but you have to take into account the benefit. Right now, DTE is saying we should just take into account the bad part of having solar and the cost to the grid of having all these solar users, and that's the argument that they won when they went to this inflow-outflow system that's really changing the payoff period. So what we did with the bill that was just signed was breaking down another one of the many barriers that are in place for that payoff period to make sense for homeowners, right? And so, so even though there are still some barriers in place that I'm working on breaking down, we last night, with the stroke of a pen, were able to break down a major barrier too.
You mentioned we've been focusing primarily on the homeowner and how this impacts a homeowner. Ann Arbor, 2 weeks ago or so, installed solar panels on one of the fire stations. Would the laws, the rules that apply now, as well as how they would apply if your bills get approved, does it apply to the city of Ann Arbor, to the University of Michigan, and is it a way of giving more incentive for larger corporations, let's say, to install more solar panels or other alternatives?
Yes, absolutely. So it would help University and City of Ann Arbor and larger businesses. Say Briarwood wanted to put some solar panels, it would help them as well. So and again, because we want to redo the system to actually value solar energy for what it's actually worth, instead of the system that DTE wants, which undervalues solar for the benefit of their shareholders.
Right. And in the case of personal and corporate, are there tax issues as far as giving an incentive to install? In other words, for the homeowner, do you get any type of a break anymore on your income tax or anything like that to install?
So there are some resources out there. There's not as many as there used to be. But really what we're trying to focus our energy on is breaking down the cost barriers that exist. I actually believe that looking at that side of things is going to actually be more impactful in the end than creating more incentives on the other side. So if we can change the way DTE treats solar, if we can change the way that solar panels are actually considered as part of your property, I think those steps will make a significant impact on solar production.
Within Ann Arbor and Southeast Michigan, other than the solar panels, are there other alternative forms of energy that are really being, you could say, developed? I'm thinking like the windmills and that seem to be more on the west side of the state.
Yeah, definitely wind, geothermal, that sort of stuff. And there are some other systems as well. Because of the 150 kilowatt cap that we have on our bills, a lot of the larger alternative energy generation systems probably would not be included. But one of the interesting examples that I actually just toured the other day is landfill gas. So we have landfills all over Southeast Michigan, especially old landfills, that generate methane. And if we didn't recapture that methane, it would just go out into the atmosphere. And methane is a far worse greenhouse gas than CO2. It actually hurts the environment and hurts and furthers global warming even more. And so by capturing that methane and sucking it out of the landfill and then using the methane as a replacement basically for natural gas that you would mine from the ground, for example, or extract from the ground, you're actually replacing those carbon emissions, and you're actually also creating less methane emissions from the landfill as well. So it's sort of a benefit on both ends, and it's kind of a cool way to recapture waste gas essentially and make it into something that we can use.
And as you say, Southeast Michigan and in certain ways the state of Michigan back in the 70s and 80s seemed to be getting trash
Yeah.
from everywhere, including
A lot,
Canada and that.
yes.
And so we do have a lot
Yeah.
of landfills, which after a while,
Right.
as you say, will create this methane.
Exactly, and actually the city of Ann Arbor, on our old
Yes.
landfill on the south side of town,
Ellsworth, yeah.
is actually doing that. They're recapturing the gas and making it into electricity that the city is using. The city also has 2 hydroelectric dams that they're using as well. So.
In the last minute or two here, are there other than the 2 areas that we talked about, which is the criminal justice and the alternative energy and that,
Yeah.
what else are you sort of focusing on over this next year?
So on the theme of bipartisan legislation, so we had the criminal justice reform, we had these solar bills, and on that same theme, just earlier this week, we actually introduced a bill addressing the issue of corporate tax handouts, corporate tax giveaways. So for too long, the state of Michigan has been basically doling out cash to large corporations that have huge profit margins at the expense of being able to fund our basic civic services, being able to fix our roads, make sure our schools are well funded and that our teachers are paid enough, making sure that we have money for higher education, making sure that we have a good park system throughout the state. So I want to eliminate in particular the mega tax credits, which are giving away $600 million of our taxpayer money every year to some
When
of
you
the
say
largest
giving away,
corporations.
is it actually money going or just that not collected?
So I believe that they actually pay taxes to the state,
then
and
get-
then we refund them
Okay.
a significant portion of that back, so that they, so
Right.
that's sort of the tax credit that they have. So we had actually a group of 6 Republican and 6 Democratic legislators, and then myself, who I sponsored the bill, and we had 6 Republican co-sponsors and 6 Democratic co-sponsors. It's a great bipartisan effort because there's realization on both sides of the aisle that we can't continue to give out our tax dollars to private corporations that are making, many of them, record profits when all of our civic functions and public infrastructure is suffering as a result. And at the end of the day, there's this ongoing argument that folks make that say we need to attract businesses to Michigan, we need to attract talent to Michigan. In my opinion, the way to do that is strong schools, strong public education, strong higher education, not roads where you don't
transport,
where you can actually drive from point A to point B without busting a rim, and and making sure that we have an attractive state for people to live in. And this whole corporate tax giveaway stuff that's been going on just doesn't work. And these companies, we know, once the dollars start to dry up, they'll go to the next state that's dangling money in front of them. And these businesses, by and large, are not really investing in the future economy of our state. So I think it's time that we end those programs and reinvest those public dollars in public and civic infrastructure for the future of our state.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon and appreciate your comments and your examples of how actually politics can work in a bipartisan way.
It's been really exciting. Thanks for having me.
Great, thank you. I want to thank our viewers for joining us today. Look forward to your continued support here on Conversations. Thank you.